Hello, and welcome to the Asian American Forward podcast. This week, I'm really excited because we have a book review, which is kind of my territory. But I'm also really thrilled to talk with Dawn about some of the historical context. We are traveling today to the Old West to discuss Pam Zhang's book, How Much of These Hills is Gold? So I'm really excited to talk about some of the history and also just this novel in particular. So as usual, joining me is my co-host, Don Sun. Hi, Don. How are you this week?
Hi, Katie. Hi, everyone. Listener, I love you.
And so, yeah, the book we're discussing today, as I said, is written, it's a debut novel written by a woman named Pam Zhang. And the title, again, is How Much of These Hills is Gold? It's set in what I can only describe as a mythical version of the American West, so during the gold rush kind of time period. And it follows the story of two Chinese American children, Sam and Lucy, and particularly Lucy's journey in search of her place in the world, in search of home. And so that's one of the themes that we will talk about as we get into the discussion of the book. But before we get into the actual content, I thought it would be really good to give some historical context. The book was inspired by a lot of classic Western literature. Zhang talks about growing up reading Little House on the Prairie and things like that. So it's set in the 1860s and 1870s. So Dawn, I was hoping that you could give me and our listeners some context for that time period. What was the West like for Chinese people at that time?
Yeah, that's the kind of a good question to start it. And most new immigrants, especially for my generation, we came to this country pretty late. But after 20 years settled in San Francisco, we know it's what San Francisco means. And also it's bring me back to the digging more deep in the history. And also when I run the Cupertino Historical Society, and I got a lot of old folks, they have all kind of a relationship to the generation before, and also it's back to the 1882. That's like a gold rush hour, and also the Continental Railroad across the U.S. from east to the west. Those kind of a history is really it's the first generation Chinese coming to this country. They coming here at the peak. We call them a peak, coming here to do the railway workers. And that time is most Chinese coming to this country, it's a single man. They don't have a wife, they don't have a children, just coming here at the labor to build the railroad, especially from Colorado and all the way to the San Francisco, especially Sacramento and San Francisco. Those kind of Chinese coming here, they work very hard. And also they take a lowest salary, almost zero. As long as they have a food, they have a shelter, they are very happy. So that's caused some white Caucasian laborers the angers. So that's they take their jobs, and also they work very hard and build the railway very quick. So that's cause some tense between the Sugarland white Caucasian labor and the Chinese. So, the Chinese, they don't speak English at that time, they only work. So it's in the political arena, they don't have any voice, nobody represent them. So it's gradually built some hate toward the Chinese railway workers. And then people start looking for the sanitary habit, and sometimes they spat, sometimes whatever they have the long hair, the pony hair, and then it's cause a lot of fight, especially go to the violence, and even go to the violence, the local community and the local official, they all stand with a white Caucasian guy and kill some Chinese workers. And that time is gradually that they passed the law. the law is today we know it's the Chinese exclusion law. That's one is just when Chinese workers finish the Continental Railway road, and then the Chinese exclusion law forbidden any Chinese to marry in this country. So if they don't marry, they don't have children. If they don't have children, they have no future in this country. So that's kind of things and they are returned in Chinatown. We think Chinatown is just kind of a cultural stuff, right? But that time Chinatown is they just contained all Chinese workers there in particular area. They cannot go out. So that's the original Chinatown coming from. And when when the railroad merged from west to the east, that's in I think it's which state? Utah.
Yeah.
Utah did cross the ceremony when the east meet the west the railroad. That's all Chinese did it, but the ceremony they took the picture, and there's no even single Chinese in the picture. So they put all the Caucasian behind the train and celebrate, but there's no Chinese. But actually, the whole work done by Chinese workers. That's
I'm so glad that you brought up that picture, because that the author Zhang actually cites that image from the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad as one of her inspirations for writing this story. And the railroad plays a big part in the middle of the book, which I hope we're going to talk about today. I also wanted to jump in and ask you a question a little bit more about the Chinese Exclusion Act, because I know that you've done a lot of work on that. So that this goes beyond the scope of the book, but maybe you could tell us a little bit about how the Chinese Exclusion Act and policy towards immigrants from China has kind of evolved even into now.
Yeah, that's kind of things that I started involved in the late 80s or late 90s. So there's a couple of Chinese elected official, like assembly member in California. They start to digging some history, especially when most immigrants from Taiwan, Hong Kong, and also it's from mainland China, they start to voice their concern about the Chinese in this country, the history. So Assembly Member Paul Fang has been the first one to bring this law into people's attention. Say the Chinese exclusion law in 1882 is the only U.S. law has been targeted on particular race to say all Chinese not allowed in this country and build some discrimination against one particular ethnic group. And this is not right for America. So it's the first in California, we passed the apology to Chinese American in this country. That's the first one. And then Congress member Judy Chu and the Congress member Mike Honda, they both in California, they realized that if we want to correct the historical wrong or mistake, something we have to apologize to Asian American, to Chinese American. So in in 2016 or 2014, they start to move the apology in Congress, and Judy Chu became the co-author with Mike Honda. I was the chair at that time in the West Coast to move this movement. So I probably have like a 50 organization to sign the letter and also support Judy Chu. We made like a 3 to 5 fundraising to support this bill. Fortunately, the second inauguration, I think that's 2012, right? Yeah, 2012.
I mean, I guess it would have technically been 2013, but yeah.
Yeah, 2013. Yeah, that time is I was invited by Judy Chu as a electoral colleague, You know, that's the only 500 some people in this country. And Judy Chu say, Don, you have done tremendous work to pass this bill. Because on the, I remember on the 2012, it's the June, I think June 18, that the congressional have the floor debate about whether it's Congress should apologize to Chinese American in this country. And I'm the only person flew from California to Capitol Hill, sitting on the floor with Judy Chu, and passed the bill. That kind of things give me some honor. Is just tell the all Asian, all Chinese American in this country, if we want to get involved politics, we never should forget our history, especially in this country. We need to get involved in the politics. That's one give me pleasure. Is I spent the whole day in the Sacramento, Capitol Hill of California to filling out all the card and the signature. You know, in this country, probably I'm the only one to sign the electoral college signature. I vote for Obama. So I use my Chinese character to sign every single letter. Probably we have to sign like more than 10 pieces of paper. And then this one become certified vote and sent to the Congress. You remember the on the January 6th.
Yeah, no, certification.
Box, right?
I had no idea that you had done that. That's crazy.
Yes, yeah, that's in the box in the 2012. I have my signature in that box and signed in Chinese. It's very
What's
funny.
Your Chinese name? I actually don't know.
Oh, my Chinese name is Sun Xiaoguang. Xiaoguang means the dawn in the morning sunshine. So the sun is my last name. So it's my first name is Morning Sun. And you know, it's my English name is Dong Sun. But my colleague is an Italian American, say, Dong, and how we can give you an English name, because Xiaoguang is very, very hard to pronounce. And he asked what that mean. I told him it mean morning sunshine. He said, oh, that's a dawn, Dawn, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's a girl's name. So he said, okay, let's change the tone a little bit, make it dawn. So that's where my name coming from.
Oh, I love that. I love to hear everybody's stories about like how they chose their English name, and like Chinese names also are so like interesting because they all have like really specific meanings.
Yeah.
So I think that was a worthwhile tangent for us to go on. But to kind of bring it back to the novel, the historical context, I think, is really significant for this book because the Western has been so traditionally like white dominated in American literature and film and TV. We see it populated with white cowboys and savage native tribes. And so kind of part of what Zhang talks about as being the project of this novel is to assert that Asian faces and Native American faces and other kinds of people were in the West all along and really belong there. So she sheds light on what life might have been like in the sort of Western fantasy that we imagine in American pop culture could have been like for these characters. So I wanted to get your impression as an Asian American about how you relate to the Western as a genre, and then maybe how you've seen or not seen your community represented in American culture.
Yeah, I think it's the Western culture, especially in California. I think it's Asian here. It's not like we see the cowboys movie that's called the Western cultural stuff. It's a different. That's probably in the middle West, right? So it's not typically in California. In California, it's most Asian or my friend. They are the next couple of generations. The most is all in Chinatown, in San Francisco, a little bit in Sacramento. Those people is conduct pretty low, like the laundry, restaurant. It's all in that industry. Nobody have a pretty significant role in the politics, in the cultures. And you know, I do have a friend. Their mom is like hookers, those kind of things. They just do it to survive, and then to do some entertainment but but they only serve their own community to build a laundry room, small restaurant, and then send their kids to the school. That's the only dream they have. But overall, in our generation, especially people coming from Hong Kong, that's probably around 1970, and because the Chinese communists just start take over Hong Kong. And then from Taiwan, that's the kind of in early 80s. And then the third wave from mainland China is like people like us, is all coming to this country around the late 80s. They all well educated, coming to the graduate school. People don't pay too much to the Western culture, but they try to do some research, especially on the textbook. And a lot of people, they try to put the railroad, the Chinese history into the California textbook. That's kind of things. This generation, we try to link their roots and with the next generation, because people like my kids' generation, or at your age, they know nothing about the Chinese culture, and both in this country and back to their parents' hometown, mainland China, they know nothing about it. So it's my passion to bring this kind of a history into the textbook and to the Capitol Hill, to the politics, into the bill. Is just to try to make a new immigrant and assembling to this country's culture, know each country to immigrant to this country, they have all their heritage and the cultural stuff, and harmonize all community together. That's the what I involved.
Yeah, I love that you brought up, obviously, the importance of immigration is huge for the Chinese community and really any person in the US, as we've talked about in our City of Dreams episode. We were all, the vast majority of Americans anyway, were at one time immigrants. So I love that that's also a focus of Zhang's book. She talks about, this is a great quote that I pulled from her profile in the New York Times that I wanted to read. Thinking about the literature of the West, Zhang says that she's long been drawn to it because it shows the way that ordinary people can live epic lives against this epic backdrop. She said she feels similarly about immigrant stories. This is a direct quote from Zhang. How they've crossed entirely new lands and traded one life for another. Those stories are epic in nature, and they deserve to be told in that way. So I definitely think that sort of epicness of the immigrant story and kind of honoring it as that by tying it into the Western is something that this novel does really well. So I wanted to get into talking a little bit about the book here. The novel is told in 4 parts, kind of taking place each in a different period of time as you learn the story of Lucy and Sam and their family. So Sam, who we can discuss later, kind of presents as a male for a significant portion of the novel. And Lucy, it kind of opens as they try to bury their father, who is a prospector. And as you go back in time, you kind of learn the family history of Ba and Ma and Lucy and Sam and their kind of life moving around Northern California. Their dad is a prospector. So they've kind of worked in mines and lived in all these different towns. And you learn about the ways that they've experienced racism and also how they've kind of just chosen to survive in this world, both as people who are viewed as foreigners, even though, as we find out later, Ba was born in the US, as are his 2 daughters, Lucy and Sam. They don't know any other home. Even though they're constantly being perceived as outsiders. And so lots of the coverage of this book, I've read interviews with Zhang and reviews and whatnot, comment on the role that gender plays in the story as we kind of see Lucy and Sam both being born female, but kind of reacting to that reality and interacting with their gender in very different ways as they have to navigate what would have been a really difficult time to be a woman in the 1860s and 70s. But I actually think that the most interesting part was the middle of the book. So when it begins, Lucy and Sam are trying to bury their father. Then we kind of get some backstory about their family and find out how their mother died, and like kind of how their family got to the place where they were sort of on the run. And then we get some backstory, and this was the part of the novel that I enjoyed the most, the third part, where we finally hear Ba tell his story in his own words. And that's also where the railroad comes to play a really big part in the story. And I thought that this kind of reflection on the immigrant experience here, and then in the last part, which wraps up Lucy and Sam's story, was really interesting. So as I said, Ba we find out, was born in the US. He was found by a prospector by his dead parents, like as a small child, and he has never known any other world. He doesn't even speak any Chinese. He only speaks English. And he kind of spends his youth going around the West as a prospector, eventually gets picked up by the railroad to teach English to the Chinese railroad workers. And that is how he meets Ma, the mother in the story. And their experience working on the railroad is kind of this terrible tragedy that like forms the core of the book. I still can't decide if I want to spoil it. Should I spoil it?
No, just let people read it.
Okay, I won't. So you'll have to read to find out what happens to them. But their bond is kind of based on the assumption that Ba is Chinese and wants to return eventually to the mainland, or at least Ma really does want to, but he's only ever known the West. And so they're kind of representative of these two pulls within Lucy and Sam on the book jacket. And this is a quote of Lucy's that she talks about what makes a home a home. And throughout the novel, we kind of have these characters traveling through this very desolate landscape, meeting all of these sort of dangerous other characters and having to navigate hairy situations, and always looking for that place of home. I won't spoil how the novel ends and how they come to answer that question of what makes a home a home. But I wanted to talk about this concept. I think the concept of home with immigrant stories is so important. And as an immigrant yourself, Dawn, I wanted to ask how you connected all to that question. As an immigrant, how do you think of home, or what makes a home to you? How would you answer that question?
It's a very, very challenging question. So for the first generation immigrant that we come into this country, and we love this country, we take everything is it's very, very satisfied. But this satisfaction never coming to the conclusion. We take it as a home until very, very late. And I think it's even myself until today, I still think I have a two home. One is back in mainland China. Even I don't have any property, something there, but I still think that's a part of my home. And also now it's here in the Silicon Valley. I think this is my home. I've been here like more than 20, almost 30 years. I have built my friendship, network, community here. I take it at home. So this is the double identity or the double home concept is always trouble me. I don't know, your people is always think this is the only home you have. But for us, especially first generation, we always try to work hard and make our children think this is our home. But at the meantime, we always try to teach them some Chinese culture. See, you have your roots there over the Pacific Ocean somewhere. You have some relatives. So every year now it's the COVID, we couldn't. But the most in my children's younger age, every summertime I try to bring them back to there. They do enjoy travel in China. So they say, oh, this is your home. It's my home, right? So they came in and they're coming back. So gradually, I think it's even for our children, they have some kind of remote home concept in mainland China and home here. That's their grow up here. It's a pretty challenging for people. Is we define the one home, but the overall for all the immigrant, the first generation and the second generation, they have a two different home. So it's children like my sons, they think they are the owner of this country, or they can do whatever they want, and they can be the leaders, be professionals. But for us, honestly, it's very, very hard to think this is our own home. It's very challenging. If people tell you, age like me, they said, "Oh, American is my only home." Not really true. Even we swear to the when we become a citizen, we always have a two home in our deep in our heart.
What do you think are those factors that kind of made the US feel like a second home to you? Like because I'm sure at first it was like, this is just the place that I live. What do you think what were those things that made you begin to accept the second home?
I'm a kind of a political animal. So it's most time it's when I think, I always thinking from a political system. So I think it's in our human history of the world, and American is the most democratic, and also it's a freedom for everyone, and try to be the equal to everyone. This one is the we think, if this not our home, nowhere can be our home. So that's the kind of a political concept of I take this country as my home. It's the political system, it's the constitution that's build a relationship among all of us, and regardless of what kind of a race you are. But this one, and maybe too optimistic, but this is the place that I really love to take it as my home. I try to assemble myself and try to contribute to the community, to serve people, help others. But it's fundamentally there's still some deep roots overseas.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that. And I think that dovetails really nicely with the novel's kind of investigation of what is a home and what makes someone at home in a place. So I would definitely recommend it. And we have barely scratched the surface of the interesting things happening. Yeah. Like I said, and this is something that Zhang has talked about in a lot of her interviews, the first like 10 or 12 pages have no gendered pronouns. So that's like really interesting and different. So I would definitely encourage anyone to pick up a copy of this book. Also, the cover art is just gorgeous. So it got a lot of buzz in 2020. It was like on everyone's books of the year list, Oprah, Obama, you name it. It was pretty much on the list. And of course, was long listed for the Booker Prize, which is a big English literary prize for the people who care about that. Me, I am a total nerd, so I do care. But that is a little bit about C. Pam Zhang's How Much of These Hills is Gold. I definitely recommend it to all of our listeners. With that, we will do our final segment before we close up this week. So Don, how have you been staying entertained?
I'm going to tell you, I'm going to book my flight ticket, fly to New York to have my Chinese New Year there, because I'm going to help Andrew to run Chinese New Year celebration. And even the COVID and heavy snow, I still want to go there and to have a good Chinese New Year there. That's my plan.
Oh, well, be safe and have fun, double mask, all of that stuff. And I will say my thing that I want to plug this week is Spotify has recently launched audiobooks of some like classic, just things that are in the public domain, so that are available for free. So they've got some Jane Austen and those kinds of things on there. But I have been listening to a short novella called Passing by Nella Larson, which it was written, I think, in the 1920s or 30s. But it's about two Black women, one, and they're fairly fair-skinned, one who decides to pass as white and the other who decides to continue living as a Black woman. And It is really interesting and shockingly relevant for a book that's almost 100 years old. And the audiobook is fantastic and available for free on Spotify if you have that. So I would definitely recommend it. We will wrap it up there for this week. Don, thank you for joining me as usual.
Thank you, Katie. If I recommend the one book for the people, classical book is I like Pearl. Her book is A Good Earth. That's written during the 1930s, and she got the Nobel Prize. But that write the Chinese rural cultural life. That's the moved me so much. That's why it's the opposite of this book that we're talking about. But that's the describe China. Rural country. That's the so moving. I have a burst into the tears to read it. It's so good. Yeah. Thank you.
I should definitely read it. I can't believe I've never read that book before. Yeah. It's Pearl S. Buck, right?
Yes.
Yeah, The Good Earth.
Good Earth. This is so good. So good. Yeah.
I love that also that you brought it up as like a kind of a corollary to How Much of These Hills is Gold. I should definitely look into reading that.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for talking with me as usual, Don. My name, of course, is Katie Simpson. Our podcast is sponsored by Asian American Forward. You can visit our website at www.asianamericanforward.com. If you enjoyed the show this week or have a topic you'd like to hear us discuss on a future episode, send us your comments at info@asianamericanforward.com. We'd love to hear from you. You can also find us on Facebook and hear more conversations between Don and I at our YouTube channel. If you're a fan of the show, leave us a review in the Apple Podcast Store or tell someone about us. Thanks for joining us, and we'll talk to you again next week.
Thank you. Bye.